London-listed Blencowe Resources, Epic code BRES, is the owner and operator of the Orme Cross project, a world-class graphite project in Uganda with an initial JORC indicated and inferred mineral resource of 24.5 million tonnes at 6% total graphite content. Backed to the tune of $5 million by the US government's International Development Finance Corporation, Blencowe are currently engaged in advanced testing of bulk samples in China as part of the DFS process. Managing Director Mike Ralston joins me to discuss the latest developments today. Good morning, Mike. How are you?
Good morning, Alan. I'm very well, thanks. Nice to speak with you again.
Good to speak with you again too. So, Mike, Orme Cross really has come of age during the past year. Before we discuss today's announcement, can you bring us up to date on progress with the DFS and the testing in China?
Yeah, I think the testing that's going on in China is obviously an integral part of the DFS. It's not the only part. Obviously, there's work going on with infrastructure in country and lots of other things too. But the test work in China is all around getting qualified on our small flake product, which represents about 50% of our end products that we'll produce as concentrate. And because they go into the batteries ultimately, this product has to be extensively tested. Not just in labs, which we've done all over the world, successfully done, but also through bulk sample testing, either at your own pilot operation, if you are lucky enough to spend a lot of money and build one, or if not, more cost effectively, you can do the same thing in a pilot facility as we're doing in China. And so that program has been going very well. We've completed the transition from raw material into concentrate. We've got about 30 tons of concentrate produced by our partner over there, and that concentrate is now being moved. Excuse me, the smaller flake concentrate is being moved across to the SPG producer, which will be then upgrading it, purifying it to a 99.95 spheronized purified graphite, which is what ultimately goes into the battery. So that's the next stage. That'll be happening during the course of June. And by the end of June, going into July, we would be expecting to have that product completed. And as we go into July, we then want to get some of that product tested by some of the key OEMs where we've been talking to, the likes of POSCO. And we'll be able to ultimately move towards offtake contracts once that's completed. So it's a process. We can't cut corners. It has to be done. But it's going very well, and certainly to date, everything's gone to plan. And just keep watching as we obviously get results. We'll be publishing them into the market, and hopefully it leads towards the offtake agreements that we ultimately need and want.
Excellent. Well, of course, a real key milestone for the company today. Blencowe announced a maiden offtake agreement with Chinese graphite giant Jilin for the large flake product. Now, this really is a major milestone moment for the company, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Obviously, we've had a lot of attention focused on this bulk sample testing and that program for the small flakes. But the other half, or nearly half, of our end product is the large flake concentrate that we will be producing at Orme Cross. And it's a lot easier to get it tested and ultimately into offtake contracts. Because it's not going into a battery, it doesn't require that extensive testing. Although, to be fair, it has had a lot of test work done, but it's certainly not the same complexity. So we had a lot of interest in that. There's definitely a shortage of high quality large flake product. And China doesn't produce as much of that as it does the small flake product. So there's a market for it. We've had a lot of interest, and I'm very happy to say, as a key milestone for us, that we have a first MOU. It's a non-binding MOU, but I think the market needs to be aware that the factors that take it through into being binding are completion of the DFS and ultimately funding, because we don't want to get ourselves locked into a binding contract without those two factors completed. So it's going to be non-binding until then. But Jilin are a major player. They've definitely done a lot of work with us. They know us well, and we know them. And ultimately, we think that this is obviously the start of a long and fruitful relationship with them. But it represents a very significant portion of our overall revenue because, as I think I've mentioned before, the large flake products sell for considerably more than the small flake products as a concentrate. So even though it's slightly less than half of our overall end product, it actually represents more than half of the revenue that we're expecting to make. So yeah, a very key moment for us. We've come a long way. The team have worked very hard to get here, and I'm very proud to say that we've now put this milestone behind us, and we'll obviously be looking to add further large flake offtake contracts, hopefully through the Western markets. My COO will be traveling through the States and UK and Europe in the next 1 to 2 months to go and have a look at some parties that are interested there. And ultimately, we'd like to put away contracts for all of our large flake product, as soon as possible. So yeah, watch this space.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Mike, you flagged that pilot plant production could commence at Orme Cross in early 2026, and it seems as though offtake partners and graphite producers, based on what you've just said, are now lining up to sign terms. What what are the next steps along this road?
Well, there's a lot that's happening all in parallel. We continue to do a lot of infrastructure work and environmental work in country to make sure that we can obviously build the mine and have everything that we require there to do so. We're continuing to do a lot of work in the funding department in terms of building the relationships with the parties that we think will ultimately fund this project and take it through implementation. We can only go so far without completing the DFS, so it's really just getting people interested in, I guess, early stages in terms of that funding, and then going through all the offtake relationships and qualification testing that I've just mentioned, in order to make sure that we get every part of what we're going to produce ultimately sold through contracts that we can build in place right now. And then more recently, we've been putting in place this revised strategy, which incorporates a downstream SPG, spheronized purified graphite plant in Uganda. We think that's the way to go. In fact, to be honest, I'm going to be blunt and say that is the way we have to go in order to raise the overall weighted average selling price of what we're ultimately going to be selling, and to differentiate ourselves, because everybody wants that purified 99.95 graphite product. And producing that outside of China has considerable value. At the moment, it's all pretty much all produced in China. So we're going to be working very hard over the next 6 to 12 months to put that strategy in play. And it will hopefully come into place alongside and together with the rest of the Orme Cross DFS. But it will ultimately be implemented slightly behind the first phase. Our first phase of development of Orme Cross would represent a much smaller opening phase one plant of production for 5,000 tons of concentrate. And then as we've learned, as we gain experience and have success in terms of the full operation to mine it, process it, and sell it, then we can build a much larger plant and be confident that it's going to be successful. So, yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of news flow that's going to come from all of that. But ultimately, it's a journey, and we're learning as we go. But this downstream SPG strategy is going to make the difference.
Okay, excellent. On that road to production, your PFS suggests very low production costs compared to peer group. Are these costs likely to reduce further once Orme Cross actually enters production in 2026?
Well, one of the things that selling half our product, which is the small flakes, as concentrate down the road into an SPG facility that we build, means that we're not transporting our lowest value product a very long way to get to Mombasa port and then ultimately across the sea. What we want to do is just move it 180 odd kilometers, upgrade it into something a lot more valuable and less of it, and then transport that product across the same sort of end buyers. So ultimately, that strategy is going to lower the operational cost considerably. We think it can carve out a significant chunk of the $110 per ton that we had in the PFS for transport and logistics. So yes, we would be expecting to bring the operational costs down, and obviously that's going to be very, very critical and meaningful, I guess, in terms of the overall value of the project. And we'll continue to work on not just the logistics, but every other aspect of it as well, in order to make sure that we can produce for as low as possible, because being one of the lowest cost producers is absolutely necessary for graphite in order to make the kind of returns and the kind of margin that you need to justify the investment and ultimately shareholder returns.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Well, on the subject of shareholder returns, of course, you've got very strong support from an investor network in Africa, and of course, funding from the US Development Finance Corporation. Two questions for you. Firstly, do you expect that the investor network will provide the required funding support through to production in 2026? And secondly, how does the testing work you're currently doing in China sit with the policies of the USDFC?
They're very good questions you ask. We continue to get a lot of interest from all over. We've got a unique project in many, many ways. The graphite market is growing as the energy transition happens. And part of that interest is coming from Africa, both in Uganda and East Africa, but also in a wider African context. Africans are very interested and keen to be involved in African projects, and we see that as a very important part of developing this project going forward. So I keep on the lookout for good, strong African support and partnerships and ultimately investors. And we have introduced some in the past, and we'll continue to add to that as we go forward. There'll be one part, I guess, of our investor base that takes us through to finalising the DFS. We're also obviously London listed. We're going to be bringing on board other funds and other institutional support from the European and UK markets. But it's a blend of all of those who will get us there, together with the funding that we've got from the United States government via the $5 million grant from the DFC. In terms of the second part of your question, look, it's a very interesting part of this. The big mission, I guess, of the Western world and the US government in particular, but it's not just them, is to reduce the dependency that the world has on China in terms of this bottleneck, and that's in the further purification of a lot of battery metal products, graphite included. As I said before, about 98% of the purified graphite goes through and in China, and it's done there, and then it goes back out into the world, and it creates a bottleneck, and that can be used for geopolitical and other purposes. So everybody wants to change that, to alleviate that bottleneck, and that's what we're working towards. If we get an SPG plant up and running in Uganda, that's going to obviously go some way towards helping that a solution to that problem. Excuse me, but it's not going to happen overnight. This is 25, 30 years worth of experience and IP that's been built up in China. They are very interested and keen to work with us going forward, the Chinese experts that have this experience, because they're also under the pump internally from their own government, threatening to remove their ability to export purified graphite. And so they have interest to build a plant outside of China, and Uganda sits very well because we have very abundant, low-cost power and hydropower at that, and a number of other key advantages as well. Plus, of course, the Oran Cross mine that can be feeding any such SPG plant forever from just up the road. So, we've got to manage everybody's expectations. We're sort of sitting in the middle of two huge parties, both the West and China. They've got their own agendas. Our agenda is purely commercial. I mean, we obviously want to help alleviate shortages. We want to do everything we can, but ultimately we just want to build experience and success. We've got something world class, very unique, and we're going to work through that with all of our partners and find a way to do things. That's, I think, what we've become quite good at doing is finding a way through and finding a way to do things rather than not to do things. And so, yeah, we'll continue to work through this and find a way to build this strategy and implement as a production hub that can ultimately bring a lot of value to everyone. So, yeah, it's a slightly different strategy and unique in the sense that not many other graphite peers are looking to do downstream processing. Most of them are just considering producing a concentrate. We don't find there's enough margin in just doing that, and we think that those parties are going to be just literally fighting each other as to where they're going to end up selling it. Whereas we'll have our off-taker, which is, I guess, ourselves, if we're the joint venture partner, sitting down the road to take it, and then from that SPG facility, we'll have a very, very valuable product that will have huge demand. So we're kind of winning on a number of different fronts. And yeah, we think that's the way to go.
Excellent. Well, I'm aware you won't be able to disclose everything that's happening, Mike, at the moment, but can you give investors a flavour of upcoming events and likely value inflection points in the coming months?
Well, I've probably touched on a number of them already. We've got our first MOU out now. I mentioned that my CIO is running around looking at further offtake contracts, particularly looking at the Western markets over the next 2 months. And then we're going through this final process of getting what I call tier one qualified in terms of the small flake product, ultimately to the SPG and going into the batteries. And we see that leading to not just one, but hopefully more than one MOU with a leading or leading tier OEMs that are in the space going forward. So quite a lot of excitement in that regard. I guess there's going to be more work and more news that comes through on this SPG strategy and what we want to do in terms of building that facility in Uganda. That's gathering some momentum. But it's all linked because those parties obviously want to see that this bulk sample testing is positive before they will move any further. And then we continue to do our work on the ground. We continue to talk to funding partners, and we just continue to do our work everywhere in order to get this DFS completed as soon as possible. So, there'll be news flow, all the time. I think we're pretty good at getting news flow out into the market, and we just want to make sure that everyone's aware that we're working hard to get it done as quickly as we can. Sometimes a few of these things are out of our control, but at the end of the day, we're pressing very hard to get it done quickly.
Well, we wish you every success with progress in the coming months, Mike. It's been a very exciting ride. Also been great speaking with you again as well. Mike Ralston, Managing Director at Blencowe Resources. Many thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Alan, and once again, thanks for having me.
Pleasure.